Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my presentation here today virtually at the Dabrowski Congress 2024. My name is Sylvia Bagley, and I apologize that my video screen is taking up 5% in the top right corner of the screen here. I'm making this recording through Zoom, and that's the default setting. So that's why I've put a picture of myself here on the front slide. My presentation is called Coaching for Positive Disintegration, and I'll be talking with you about how to support educators specifically towards transformational change. As a brief overview of my presentation today, I'll start with a little bit of who I am and how I come to this work and being interested specifically in this intersection of ideas. I'll talk about why teachers are especially in need of support right now, then move into talking about how teaching relates to various elements of Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration. I'll talk about what transformational coaching looks like in schools and how we might apply a positive disintegration lens to this model of coaching. And then finally, what some next steps might be for exploration in this area. So starting off with a visual of who I am, there's a lot of different facets of my life, and I enjoy making collages, so I thought I would create a visual overview here of some of the many things that are really important to me and that ground my life and are part of my value set. Up in the top left corner, first of all, is my partner and my three kids who are all twice exceptional gifted. Right now, they are ages 11, 14, and 15. Up here on the top, you'll see a picture of Miller Hall, which is where I work at the University of Washington in the College of Education. I am a teaching professor. My formal title is Assistant Teaching Professor of Equitable Instructional Leadership. And I've put a photo here of just some of my students that I've worked with over the years. They're excited because they've just finished giving their culminating capstone presentations. I love music. I love books. I love movies. I have a film review site that I have been working on for many, many years. So I have overexcitabilities and intensities that definitely show up for me, in addition to being with and raising my family and my work. And I'm also passionate about social justice and equity issues in education. And I put an example here of time that I spent volunteering for an organization called University Beyond Bars, where we offered post-secondary instructional opportunities for incarcerated men nearby where I live. And then finally over here, I've also included an image from SANG, and I am a proud board member of SANG, which stands for Supporting the Emotional Needs of the Gifted. And I think I'll move on now because I don't want to get too distracted talking about that work, but it very much ties in with my interests. Okay, so first of all, getting us grounded. This presentation is about teachers. I work with teachers. I was a teacher myself for many years. So this is the work that I have been living for a couple of decades now. Teachers, I have found, are lifelong learners who engage in highly relational, rewarding, exhausting, and decision-filled work every day. And I've also found that throughout their careers, many teachers, including myself and the teachers that I work with, regularly experience periods of disintegration with multiple opportunities for regression or stagnation or movement forward. And in this presentation, I'm going to be talking specifically about the role that coaches in schools can play in supporting teachers toward positive disintegration. Something I forgot to mention on the last slide is that in my work at the University of Washington, it's a teacher leadership program, and a core class that I teach is coaching and mentoring for adult learners. So I've been offering different variations of that class for about 16 years now. My final note here is I wanted to cite Frank's work. I'll be returning to her article in just a little bit, that teachers are authentic individuals who are mindfully involved in the inescapably moral undertaking of teaching. And I very much believe that as well. So with that said, I also wanted to ground this discussion with a little bit of mapping. I was thinking about how the levels of positive disintegration might play out in teaching. So I created this table, and as with everything that I'm presenting here today, it's an asynchronous recorded video, but I very much look forward to hearing any feedback or ideas or suggestions from any of you who are watching this. But as I was thinking about it, I thought, well, primary integration for teaching is how most teachers start off, which is, I was taught to teach this way. Here we go. This is how it's done. And then pretty quickly, most teachers are going to move into unilevel disintegration. Whoa, this is not going like I thought it would. This is a lot harder than I thought it would be. Is this actually for me? Is this something I can do? Moving to level 3, teachers know they need to make some changes, but they're not exactly sure how. Level 4 might be where coaches can help teachers to get where they start to realize they actually do have agency as a teacher. And what does that look like? And then finally, the aspirational level 5 of secondary integration. Ideally, especially for the work that I do, I would love for all teachers to have a stance that they will continuously be working towards justice and an understanding that it's an ongoing process. It's not a place that you can ever arrive at and rest at, but it can be a guiding star for teachers as they're doing their work. Again, a way to keep them grounded. And we know how important that is in positive disintegration and Dabrowski's vision. So speaking of that, as I was pulling together this presentation and thinking through my ideas, I was trying to see what kind of research has been done so far, taking a Dabrowskian perspective on the teaching career. And the most recent thing that I found was published by Frank in 2022 in Advanced Development, called A Dabrowskian Perspective on an Inspirational Teacher of Gifted Learners. And we know that positive disintegration and Dabrowski's ideas have been very present in the gifted land, and I'll talk more about that, although I'm actually broadening my scope here to talk about teachers across all different settings. So to share a little bit from Frank's article, she notes that a teacher who's in the process of becoming an inspirational teacher is also becoming or being an authentic individual. And she says such a teacher would demonstrate a more objective treatment of self and a more subjective treatment of others. That is, be high on empathy, self-awareness, and self-control, and therefore slowly approaching their own personality ideal. And there she's citing Dabrowski. And just a little bit more on how this study was played out, since it was motivational to me to read this. Frank is saying, through an in-depth exploration of how the integral elements in Dabrowski's theory influenced her case study teacher David's development, patterns of ideas that she saw emerged into themes. She was examining the interaction between heredity, the first factor, and social environment, second factor, indicators of developmental potential as the facilitator of advanced development, assessed on the basis of special abilities and talents, overexcitabilities, and multi-level dynamisms, notably the third factor. And then 3, elements of positive disintegration and multi-levelness. And then finally, she asks in this article, which I recommend you take a look at if you're interested, as an aspirational teacher who acts in the best interest of gifted students, she's wondering, who is David, her case study teacher, at the ontological core of his being? From a Dabrowskian perspective, he's one who has consciously committed to the journey from egocentrism to altruism, imagining and searching for a personality ideal and harmonizing personal values with the needs and values of others, notably his students. For him, authentic moral educational practice becomes the goal. He lives and works with students deliberately, harmoniously, and beneficially, with awareness, integrity, and responsibility. So I'm grateful to Frank for that wonderful grounding, which is exactly how I am viewing the potential process that I would love for all teachers to be able to go through. Moving on now to why it is that teachers in particular could use support around this. We know that teaching as a service career has been in continual crisis. As I mentioned earlier, I was a classroom teacher myself, a teacher's aide before that. I went on to get my master's and doctorate in education, and I've been teaching teachers ever since then. So I live and breathe the world of teaching. It's always been challenging, and I have to say probably never more so than now. Education Week's Research Center has created an inaugural teacher morale index with current teacher morale standing at -13 on a scale ranging from negative to 100 to plus 100, which is a finding that suggests on average, teachers are feeling more negatively than positively about their jobs right now. And I can attest to that anecdotally from the teachers that I work with every day. I wanted to bring back in here this notion, the Dabrowskian notion of disintegration. So as we all know, of course, the pandemic was very recent. It was incredibly challenging on the entire globe. And from my particular lens, I would say particularly so for teachers. A couple of images here on the slide. First, when teachers had to pivot all of a sudden to teaching online, and then when they were able to be back in person with their students, there was social distancing and masks. But I appreciate taking a Dabrowskian lens on this, the global pandemic, because as Dabrowski notes, global disintegration occurs in major life experiences which are shocking, but then they can go on to spur positive developments in the future. And I did see that happening with a couple of my teachers as well, that they actually found moments of great creativity and innovation throughout the pandemic, as challenging as it was. They were able to tap into other parts of their passion for this career. But back to the more negative stuff. This is an article that happens to be from a couple of years ago, but it still relates. This was just right at the beginning, with a lot of people noticing the pandemic had devastating impacts on learning and wondering what would it take to help teachers catch up. We've gotten used to headlines like this, and I'm here to tell you that this has not gone away, especially for students who are farthest from educational justice in our public school system. Not only student outcomes, academic outcomes, continue to be challenging, but students' behavior as well. In fact, more so than ever. As this article shows, more than a year, now it's been 2 years after the nation's return to in-person learning, we've seen a surge of disruptive behavior in schools, with educators saying students are still struggling to adjust to life back in the classroom. Because we're taking a Dabrowskian lens here today, at this Congress, we're going to reframe that notion of disruptive behavior, which is a good thing. We're going to see how we can support teachers in thinking a little bit differently about the ways that everyone is showing up in schools, including students. But again, to go back to the negative here, making a case of why it is that teachers need support in their jobs more than ever. Here is a chart showing that teachers' optimism has hit the lowest point in 4 years. Positive feelings about the direction of K-12 education in particular have continued to fall sharply at national, state, and local levels. Only 15% of teachers say they would recommend teaching to a friend or family member. That's once again marking the lowest point that we've recorded, the surveyors say, in 4 years of doing the surveys. Nearly half of teachers noted that they've limited classroom discussions about political and social issues in class over the past year. That's just one issue among many that's making it less enjoyable and less freeing to teach. Teachers are grappling with absenteeism and student behavior, as we just mentioned, and they report that matters are only getting worse. Nearly half of teachers, 47%, say that student misbehaviors are more frequent now than this time last year, up 8 points from last fall. However, there is optimism in this report. The authors note, nonetheless, teachers remain open towards new approaches to schooling, and these valuable perspectives could point us towards what to look out for as we move into the next school year. So this is our goal, is to keep teachers feeling feeling optimistic about their work and about the locus of control that they have around supporting students and then keeping themselves well too. Before I move on, though, I had to add this in here about this viral song, Taylor Swift's I Can Do It With a Broken Heart. I thought it was interesting and revealing that this has gone viral on TikTok, with teachers saying, oh yeah, that's our song. There's a line in there saying, I cry a lot, but I am so productive. It's an art. And this is from an article about the song going viral. The song feels especially resonant after the last few years of pandemic-related turmoil, said one teacher, an elementary school librarian actually in Maine. It was heartbreaking to teach remotely, then through masks, and not feel as if students' needs were fully met. And then what I would question is, okay, teachers have embraced this anthem, they feel like they relate to it, but should teachers need to be teaching with a broken heart? How many will make it? That's my biggest concern, because my focus and my hope is thriving for all, including teachers. So let's get back to Dabrowski again. We've been through trauma. The trauma continues to show up in different ways. Now what? Dabrowski again reminds us that disintegrative processes, although painful, are considered developmental, positive, and healthy when they lead to growth. Disintegration is not only an opportunity towards growth, but actually also a precondition for growth. So how can we look at the challenges of the pandemic and all the other challenges that regularly show up for teachers in school systems and see these as opportunities for growth? Okay, returning now to the chart that I showed you earlier about positive disintegration levels vis-a-vis teaching, my goal is for coaches to serve as one level of support for teachers as they are grappling with these 3 middle areas of disintegration in their jobs. So let's talk a little bit now about what coaches do in schools. Who are coaches? First, I want to say that the number one kind of misconception around coaches in schools, which makes a lot of sense, is that when people think about that, they automatically think about athletic coaches. That's an understandable way to think about it. And of course, those coaches do exist in schools, but that's not what I'm talking about here today. I'm talking about coaches who are supporting teachers on lots of different levels, primarily around their craft. So one pretty common definition by Joel and Killian from 2008 is that coaches are school-based professional development specialists who work with individuals and teams to design and facilitate appropriate learning experiences, provide feedback and support, and assist with implementation challenges. Their work centers on refining and honing teaching, and their indicator of success is student academic success. And in fact, that last piece about centering student academic success, that is one common form of coaching known as student-centered coaching. There's others, including instructional coaching, content area coaching for coaches who come and help specifically with math or literacy or science. There's peer coaching, which is when teachers coach one another because there aren't the funds or capacity to have someone coming in to do coaching work. And then there's also a common style known as cognitive coaching. But the coaching model that I'm going to focus on in this presentation is transformational coaching. So moving now to Elena Aguilar. In 2013, in her book, The Art of Coaching, she defined educational coaching as a form of professional development that brings out the best in people, uncovers strengths and skills, builds effective teams, cultivates compassion, and builds emotionally resilient educators. And I love how she's keeping the core essence of the original definition of coaches, but she's centering, I think, humanity and resilience and emotion, which it turns out is really core. And she, again, is talking about transformational coaching. She has written quite a few books, and there's one coming out this summer. I just found out specifically about transformational coaching, although that is the style that she has been grounding her work in over all these years. So it's emerged as a model which acknowledges that many challenges in our education system are systemic, and also that each teacher needs to deeply reflect on their own behaviors, beliefs, and ways of being in order to make a tangible shift towards more equitable outcomes and practices in schools. Just a quick note again that if what you're listening to today resonates with you, there's a lot by Aguilar out there to read. She started with The Art of Coaching in 2013, followed up with The Art of Coaching Teams, wrote a book called Onward about cultivating emotional resilience in educators, had a workbook for that, did a workbook for Art of Coaching. She published Coaching for Equity in 2020, and then she came out with a book on professional development in 2022. So a little bit more about transformational coaching before I start making those more direct connections again between this coaching style and Dabrowski. So transformational coaching has three essential components, which are the coach themselves, the client, including their behavior, beliefs, and ways of being, and then the systems within which we're all living and working. The four phases of transformational coaching that a coach will bring a teacher through while attending to self and building relationships throughout is starting with surfacing current reality, what's actually going on for a teacher where they're working. Number two, coaches can help teachers to recognize the impact that their actions and words are having on students. Number three, coaches can help teachers to explore emotions that are coming up for them as they're reflecting on their teaching and the hard work of making necessary changes. And then finally, coaches support teachers in creating new practices. And this is meant to be an iterative and cyclical process that ideally would go on continuously. A little bit more about transformational coaching. This image here from Coaching for Equity is of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Elena Aguilar argues that transformational coaching is a structure that supports learning and can take us from where we are now to where we want to be. She talks about the pillars of transformational coaching being compassion, curiosity, connection, courage, and purpose. And then she talks about some assumptions that are at the heart of transformational coaching that coaches need to help teachers surface, which includes what are our assumptions about education? Learning is a basic human need, and it is possible to create classrooms and schools that provide equitable and rigorous learning experiences for children and that result in equitable outcomes for students. Assumptions about the problem. Educational inequities are pervasive. Unjust structures and institutions are the problem, not the kids, not their parents, not their families, and not their communities. So again, Elena Aguilar argues that coaches can support teachers in being reminded about this. In terms of our assumptions about people, underlying this coaching approach is that every single child can learn and self-actualize, and that all students deserve educators who are skilled and knowledgeable about teaching and learning and who are self-aware and resilient. And then finally, assumptions about the process of coaching is that we find the time and money for what we prioritize, including dismantling systemic oppression and meeting the needs of our most marginalized students. Coaching must be holistic and must address an educator's behaviors, beliefs, and ways of being. Human beings have emotions, and it's our right to express them, engage them, and learn from them. So that's just a little bit more about transformational coaching and why I think it's such a powerful approach to the Dabrowskian lens. Throughout her books, Elena Aguilar talks about anecdotes. These are, of course, pseudonyms from people that she's worked with, but she gives us some examples of what transformational coaching can look like. She talks about coaching someone out of teaching since they came to the realization together through their work that it wasn't actually the right career for him, and it wasn't good for him or his students to be a teacher. So that's kind of an extreme outcome, but authentic. She coached a man named James by listening to his stories of distress around inequities in data and then motivating him to take necessary next steps around that. She coached Stephanie out of a deficit mindset towards students of color at her school. She coached a new principal, Lisa, in order to help put her accomplishments and failures that she was fixating on into perspective. And then she was coaching a principal who felt that teachers didn't respect her, and she engaged the teacher in river and rut stories, which is just one among many tools that she uses in this coaching. So I'm proposing in this presentation merging transformational coaching with positive disintegration in what I'm going to shorthand call transformational disintegration. And in my asterisk down here at the bottom, I want to say that I'm using this term transformational disintegration as shorthand actually for the broader concept of transformational coaching for or on behalf of positive disintegration. So I'm arguing that when combined with an awareness of the theory of positive disintegration, transformational coaches can support teachers through various stages of disintegration and reintegration by helping them recognize when their teaching practice is simply replicating an uncritical approach that they've internalized, supporting them as they begin to question the why of their teaching, working alongside them as they think about better and more humanizing alternatives, and then helping them to consciously form a teaching stance based on values, their own values, that prioritize well-being and equitable practices for all. So now I'm going to move through various elements of the theory of positive disintegration and how I see them playing out in such a model like this. Again, with transformational disintegration being shorthand for transformational coaching on behalf of positive disintegration. So the three factors immediately show up as relevant. Factor one, all teachers come to their work with an innate personality and drive. Factor two plays a huge part in terms of social and environmental influences, i.e. where they're teaching and how they're supported or not. And then factor three is their own sense of self-directed development. I would argue that an ideal coach takes all these factors into consideration, and that we definitely need to think about factors one and two as part of the broader image of what's going on for their clients, for teachers. And also to be able to help teachers stay reminded about what's within their locus of control. But then ideally, the bulk of the coach's transformative work is going to lie in the support they provide as teachers engage in self-directed development. Okay. So this has to happen ideally through an environment in which teachers are encouraged to thrive, and ideally also should be done in community with other teachers engaging in similar work. And I'll return to that. Overexcitabilities. These, as we know, can play a huge role, and yet they're not all that talked about or understood outside of certain spheres, including psychology and gifted ed. I argue they should be understood much more broadly in education. I think everyone here at this Congress is well aware of the 5 overexcitability spheres. I have on this link informal assessment for overexcitabilities that I think could be really useful for coaches to do with teachers, for teachers to do with their own students. And there's so many different ways this shows up as important. Coaches need to understand their clients. Are they showing up with one or more overexcitabilities that are impacting their ability to be effective teachers? How can they support teachers in protecting themselves while maximizing the benefits of their OEs? Coaches can help teachers understand that relating to their own students through overexcitabilities can be incredibly empowering. Like a teacher might say, I also get overwhelmed so easily by noises, everyone. I'm noticing it's a little bit noisy in here, and I'm wondering if we can have it a little bit quieter just for those of us who get easily overstimulated. Let's see. And then also it's important for teachers to think about the overall overexcitabilities that might be at play with their colleagues who they may be having challenges with, kind of wondering why their colleagues are making different choices in them. And it could be that part of their profile is different sets of overexcitabilities. Lots of potentials. In terms of special abilities, this obviously also seems really crucial. All teachers, as all humans, have a unique constellation of special abilities and talents that they bring to their craft. I argue that a coach's role is to help a teacher understand their strengths and to build on those to create a classroom within which everyone is on a path towards thriving. And just a reminder from Dabrowskian ideas, we know individuals at lower levels use their talents to support egocentric goals, while those at higher levels, influenced by a value hierarchy and a vision of how the world ought to be, can use their talents and abilities as an important force for the good. And that's Frank citing Tillier in her article. And that maps on directly to Aguilar's approach as well. She notes that a transformational coach is a master at uncovering a client's assets. Knowledge of others also plays a crucial role for teachers and for the work that coaches are doing with teachers. We know that self-knowledge is positively correlated with the knowledge of others. Knowledge of oneself is not possible without association with other people, without orientating oneself to the content and motives of their behavior, which again implies the necessity of orientating oneself to one's own behavior, motives, and attitudes towards the environment. And this is all work that a coach can support a teacher in. And then finally, kind of the broad category, I decided to refer to this categorically as positive maladjustment. With the support of coaches, teachers can push back on, just for instance, unwarranted special education or behavioral labels that they're seeing that their students are being placed with. Teachers can play a crucial role also in supporting students as they go through challenging times or disintegrations. Rather than being a part of the system that's funneling too many of our students through dehumanizing and punitive systems. Teachers, hopefully, with an understanding of positive disintegration, can get more comfortable talking about socio-emotional learning in general. And then as I noted in the example from Aguilar's work, some coaches might be helping some teachers realize they're actually not suited for teaching. Or maybe a less drastic version of this would be that a particular school site or grade level or content area is not actually a particular teacher's passion area, and perhaps they'd be better served to try to move elsewhere. I did want to point out, again, because positive disintegration does show up relatively often in gifted education. There was a new book that came out this year specifically about coaches doing work in schools related to gifted education by Mofield and Phelps. And as I looked back through this book, I was noting how easy it would be to integrate positive disintegration into the framework that these authors have laid out. They argue that coaching provides opportunities to create buy-in and share the ownership of serving gifted students. Coaching allows for ongoing professional learning where teachers receive personalized feedback, regular support, and use reflection as a means for changing beliefs, behaviors, and practices in the classroom. Overexcitabilities could very easily be built into their model. So moving now to the final portion of my presentation, there's a number of different tools that I believe coaches could use in this work of transformational disintegration. And I'll briefly go through those here. And my hope and goal is that I can make all of these links available to you somehow as part of this presentation as well. So first of all, Aguilar has an activity she calls identity mapping. I have just done a screenshot of part of this, but she recommends that coaches work with teachers to look at the many different facets of our identities and reflect on which of those teachers were aware of as a child, which ones feel important to you now, um, and which ones do you prioritize sharing about yourself? Which ones do you think others typically notice about you? And then which ones do you tend not to think about? This can be a really rich activity to engage teachers with, either one-on-one or having them do this in a group. And then there's a lot more facets here as well. And at the bottom of each of these slides, I've added in some questions to reflect on. Another coaching tool is having teachers look at core values. And I was very excited. I just finished listening to a preview of what's coming up at the Dabrowski Congress in terms of a workshop exactly on this. And I was thinking, yes, this is exactly it. Coaches can support teachers in the work of identifying what their core values are. Why are they teachers? How are those values showing up specifically now for them in their teaching space? And if they're not, what moves and changes can teachers make? Coaches can engage teachers in educational journey maps, thinking about how their own journey through education has brought them to where they are now. And I have an example here of a teacher that I worked with a number of years ago. This is just part of his educational map where he was reflecting back on graduating from high school in 1994, feeling untrusting and apathetic of the public school system. He didn't really have any plans and didn't have a direction to go into and was getting into a lot of trouble during that time and had a lowered sense of self and self-efficacy. His mom gave him an ultimatum that he had to get going back to school, and that he eventually did end up going back and becoming a teacher. And now the work that he does is very much grounded in his own values and experiences. So that educational journey map can be a great way to help teachers surface that. I think this is Emma Nicholson's diagram of theory of positive disintegration. There's so much here as a rich theory that I think any kind of a visual like this can be a useful tool for a coach to share with teachers, to look at where do you feel like you are now? What are some times in your teaching career when you feel like disintegration has happened? And what moves did you make then? And what other moves can you make? As I mentioned earlier, I think coaches can introduce an overexcitabilities quiz with teachers. Coaches can definitely inspire creativity. Emma Nicholson has a great video on the benefits of using art for personality growth. And I put a screenshot here of a different coaching class that I taught. Actually, it's one that I taught for incarcerated individuals. And last year I piloted it for undergraduates about basic coaching, and inspiring creativity is an entire lesson. And there's a lot of different activities that coaches can do, tapping into creativity. I'm getting at the end of my 30 minutes here, so I'm going to try to wrap up my presentation. Getting a little bit deeper. So once coaches have more trust built up with their clients, there's even deeper and more essential work that they can support teachers in, including ABAR, anti-bias, anti-racist work. This is Liz Kleinrock. She has a book that I use with my teachers called Start Here, Start Now, A Guide to Anti-Bias and Anti-Racist Work in Your School Community. And the quote that I have here is just acknowledging that it can be really, really challenging for teachers to navigate through challenging topics. And yet we want students to feel comfortable being who they are, bringing things up in class. And so what teachers actually need is an opportunity to reflect on their own identities and their own biases and beliefs in order to show up most effectively for students. And that can be part of the work coaches do. Just a quick data check. I don't have enough time to get into detail on this, but I added this in here as just a reminder that the vast majority of teachers across the United States still identify as white. There's a couple of graphs here. The first one on the left shows you 79.3% of teachers are white. And yet, if you look closely at the graph over on the right, you'll see in comparison to the students that teachers are teaching. So the need for awareness of racism and racial identity is more crucial than ever. And to that end, coaches, again, once they've developed trust with their clients, with their teachers, they can engage in specific racial identity work. I was intrigued to see this book come out by my friend and colleague, Shelley Touchluck, called Being White Today, A Roadmap for a Positive Anti-Racist Life. And I won't go into it too much except to give a teaser to you that it's an excellent book. And part of the journey that she lays out here in terms of racial identity work involves disintegration. And she has a couple of chapters with her co-author where she talks about what that disintegration looks like and the fact that there's different options for what to make of disintegration, different pathways out. Total parallels right there with Dabrowski. So again, as we're reintegrating, which direction are we going to take? And it's our goal, I think, and our imperative as humans to ensure that we're all heading in the right direction. All right, through a number of different tools. Okay, finally, I have more here than I have time for, but I just wanted to point out that as I was researching for this presentation, transformational coaching is very much based on a broad theory of transformative learning that's really prevalent in adult learning. And as I looked at the original iteration of this by Meserow, the 10 stages of transformative learning starts with a disorienting dilemma and ends with reintegration. So we can see again here some parallels to Dabrowski's notions, which I think is exciting. And there's been some work done applying transformative learning to the coaching space, and researchers have pointed out how coaches really can play a crucial role along the stages of transformative learning. Shout out also to Freire, Paulo Freire, Brazilian educator, and his 3 levels of consciousness. Again, you can see some similarities here to positive disintegration, some differences as well, but Freire talks about how individuals might start at a level of magical consciousness, taking life at face value, and then move into more of a naive consciousness, starting to understand things, but really where we're wanting them to head is towards critical consciousness, engaging in reflection plus action in order to understand and liberate both society and one's self. So these ultimately are the stages where I hope that teachers can end up landing with support from each other, with support from teachers. I want them to feel like they have agency and that they're continuously working towards justice. And my dream, borrowing from Freire, is that we can transform the world through education. The more radical a person is, the more fully he or she enters into reality, so that knowing it better, he or she can transform it. This individual is not afraid to confront, to listen, and to see the world unveiled. I have some final tips and thoughts here on transformational disintegration. First, that coaching for positive disintegration should never be coercive. A reminder, coaching is not therapy. If deeper issues come up, then coaches need to have resources and recommendations available to give. And then I already mentioned about how coaching might mean helping someone realize they have to make some changes, some bigger changes. And finally, coaches can and should support teachers in providing quality experiences for students while they're in the midst of disintegration. So even if a teacher is going through a really challenging time, they still need to show up for students no matter what, just like parents do, and coaches can be supportive with that. My closing questions are just wondering what type of professional development tools would be most useful as we move in this direction. Would positive disintegration study or conversation groups be helpful? Could we look at how positive disintegration plays a part in teacher leaders' journeys, moving from classroom teaching to new leadership roles? And then specifically, what type of interview questions could be asked to start gathering some data around all of this? Thank you so much. I welcome feedback, ideas, suggestions, and collaboration. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now, and I look forward to seeing everyone else's presentations.